What is up, guys? Welcome to Gold Rush, a championship series companion podcast brought to you by the Run Out Podcast. I am your host, Neil Barrett. Today, Jackson is not with us. He is traveling, but I am joined by Coach Kacy Small from Shake School Lacrosse. I think this is actually going to turn out to be pretty good because there was some drama about the WLL game that I think you might be specifically equipped to maybe help explain. I know Twitter was blowing up a bit about the call. Again, we'll get into it in a little bit, but I think actually I'm happy that this worked out, that you're here with us tonight when there's something
this
that
game.
Of all games, exactly. So first things first, we'll start with the PLL game. That was the first game of the night. The Cannons beat the Whip Snakes 34-21. That is the most goals scored by a single team in championship series history. They shot 61%, which I believe was also a championship series record. We'll start there. What did you think watching that game? I don't know. Have you been watching the previous nights? We haven't really talked about that as much.
I do. I've been watching as much as I can. I've watched a bunch of them. I mean, I'm a big DVR person. I DVR a lot of stuff. I got all the subscriptions for everything. I try and watch everything. I think for me, just kind of wrap, this game tonight, I thought it really started out really well for the Whip Snakes, which I also think kind of struggled in their Tuesday night game. So after the Tuesday night struggle, when I first was watching the first quarter, first half, I'm like, okay, this is what you would expect from a Whip Snakes team, to make adjustments. First night, I won't even call them jitters because I don't think any of these guys get jitters anymore. But I just thought the first night was like a rusty night, and they didn't have, wasn't as quick and clean. And then I thought, okay, tonight, this is what I expected. They really fixed some things. They cleaned some stuff up. But then all of a sudden, the floodgates just opened up. And then I almost want to say, from a coaching lens, I wonder if the first game on Tuesday, the team kind of was a little bit surprised at how they didn't do as well as they wanted. And then they kind of came out with a little bit more of a passion and a fire and a speed and a cleanliness to their pass, a crispness. But then all of a sudden, when the game started tilting the other way, I kind of think and not that they're a young team either, but these championship series and then the PLL season, they're their own individual, entities. So what you did in the PLL season kind of doesn't really matter in the championship series. They're not fully connected. It's not like this is the next season with the next class of people. So it's almost like they had to they're finding their footing on Tuesday. They didn't find it. Tonight they started out fast, thought they found it, but then the Cannons kind of reminded them hey, you haven't really found it all the way yet. And we've got it going over here. So that was kind of just my takeaway. It was wow, Whip Snakes, here they come. And then all of a sudden Cannons were no. And then, the Whips kind of fell back into maybe we didn't get it yet. And then they kind of let that, not doubt, but kind of let that creep back in. And it was just Cannons all the way.
Yeah. We talked yesterday about them, that Jim Stagnita is hands down one of, probably is the best coach of at least the PLL era. Some people have said he's the best pro, we'll say, field coach. I don't know that I would go even that far. We talked, I think yesterday, it was about, guys like Pat Resch who've done it as well in the MLL, done it in the NLL. So that could be debatable, but at least in the PLL era, he's hands down the best coach. But he doesn't seem to translate that to sixes very well. I don't know. He seems to, I might be reading way too much into it, but he seems to almost not really like sixes. And there's something he even said in the post game press conference that sixes is just clearly not his game. The Whips have never won a sixes game. This is now, I believe, their sixth game in the championship series. They've never won one, and more often than not, they get kind of blown out. They are currently sitting at a negative 25 goal difference. But we did talk about how maybe the day off and having an extra day to both rest as well as prepare for the game. You know, Boston played last night. They didn't have a whole lot of time to really sit and watch film. I'm sure they watched some film, but you know, it's a totally different thing to have a whole day to prepare for your team versus like, I got to get rest, I got to recover, I got to ice bath, I got to cool down, and then I also have to, you know, practice, warm back up, and try and cram in some kind of study session. And it felt like you were saying, the whips exploded out of the gates. They seem to have some better idea of what they wanted to be doing.
And if Boston doesn't punch back there, right, at the time they did, they probably do keep rolling, right? Yeah. But none of these teams are not going to punch back. And so, you know, it's kind of like, you know, once it started getting, the punching back started happening, they kind of fell back. And then, you know how it is. It's 2 possessions, a game of runs, a small run here, and then all of a sudden a bounce off the pipe here, a big save there, and those things start to add up quickly. And I think those runs and those little mistakes in the outdoor game or in field games or even in box games where there's a little bit more strategy, slow down, and the pace isn't as crazy, I think you can hide those mistakes and you can come up with a save of your own. But these mistakes on one end turn so quickly to I forget, maybe 2 nights ago, there was like a 3-point swing. You know, it was a big save, a quick transition into a 2-point bomb. And there's like, yeah, but you don't see 3-point swings in the field game, you know, maybe in the PLL season with the 2-point line, but these little, you know, slip ups and mishaps and saves on one end in the sixes, it just gets so quickly turns into a double, triple negative the other way that sometimes these swings are faster, you know, more aggressive in the sixes game. You know, I almost wonder if, like you said, like, you know, maybe the sixes just isn't his thing because in a way there's different strategy involved in sixes, but I almost want to say that there's kind of less strategy. It's different, but it's less, right? You're not really setting things down and you're not milking clock, you know, for the most part until you're at the end of a half or end of a fourth quarter, but you're not going to be sitting there milking and working possessions throughout the game. You know, as a whole in the sixes, it's just so much faster. It is a different monster.
Yeah. We talked yesterday, I think, about there being less. I hadn't thought about it too much until really seeing the WLL play and feeling like there was so much more strategy, like apparent strategy. I'm not saying there is no strategy. I don't think that's what you're saying, but there is different. More of an, it's different. There seems to be more of an element of we're kind of setting up, these are kind of principles and stuff, but a lot of it is like letting our guys be our guys.
That's what I was going to say, actually, is like, you got to kind of like, you almost got to do less coaching here in a way and kind of let your players play and let them ball a little bit. If you try and make it a 5-on-5 half field game, like a lot of coaches will do that in the outdoor game. They'll make it a half field game. They'll say, you know, we're not going to be as pushy in transition. We're going to get our subs in. We're going to get our guys in and try and make people beat a 6-on-6 or girls a 7-on-7 and make it that half field game. But I mean, it's hard to make it a half field game in the sixes because those transition explosions can happen so quick. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And to your point, my theory, and I've actually had this theory for about 2 years, but you know, since I've really sort of started watching the game, and the theory is that in sixes, a 4-goal lead is basically insurmountable, even with the 2-point line in the PLL, because in order to make up 4 goals in sixes, you have to expend so much energy on both. Like you have to expend so much energy playing defense, pushing in transition, and you can get 1 or 2 back relatively easily, but not relatively easily, but like you can do that, but the energy expenditure of doing that just wipes you out, and almost immediately 2-3 more goals get piled up on you, and it's just I can't say that no one has done it, but I have watched the World Games in 2022. I have watched every game of the Championship Series. I have watched the Blue and White USA Classics. I have watched some of the international competitions. I can't think of a single game where I've ever seen a team overcome a 4-goal lead ever.
Especially without faceoffs too.
Yes.
A lot of times, right. You're trying to get back. If you're in a hole, you get saves, you get stops, and you have face-offs. Yep. Those are the 3 ways to get back in, and you're taking a major component out of there. Now there's only 2 ways: a stop and a save. And again, I would say the goalie's job is harder in sixes. I would say 100%. So now you got 3 ways to get back in normal field games: face-offs, goalie saves, and defensive stops. Well, you're taking the face-offs out of the equation. You're making the goalie's job way harder. And I also think the defensive job is way harder because some of these rosters, which is something I'll actually mention in the WLL games, but the way these rosters are constructed with so few players, like you got to decide, are we a defensive focused mini group or are we an offensive focused group? And if you focus offense, then you're definitely leaving your defense a harder job to come out, to dig out of holes. You're making it harder for your goalie. You've eliminated the faceoff. But if you're a defensive group, it's like, man, we can get the stops, but now we don't have the firepower to get it done offensively. So you're right. I mean, it's such a different game, all while being like the same game, but it's not the same game. It's very different.
Yeah, and again, we'll talk about it when we get into the women's game. It's one of the reasons why I feel like seeing the WLL so far, I have enjoyed the WLL's version of sixes better than the PLL's version because they have some added elements of it. And again, we'll talk about it when we get to the WLL game later. But all that to say that, like you're saying, that you are either kind of a offensive-minded roster, or maybe we'll say kind of a two-way. You're focused. You're trying to split your offense and defense. The Archers last night,
resources, and you're trying to allocate them all different ways. And if you go a half and half, I almost say like, oh, you might not be enough of either.
Right.
If you go half O, half D, like it's just not enough. I mean, I think it's also a very cool, unique aspect of the sixes is to see again, like. It's kind of like playing Madden back in the day and you're in franchise mode. The way you run your franchise is different than mine. Where if you look at college lacrosse, the teams kind of follow the same, this is how you get it done. We got to have a strong face-off guy. We've got an O unit. We've got a D unit. We've got these short stick D middies of specialization. Box, again, is all about, really good units. But with the sixes, it's like you're kind of like you give them enough of the roster to make it a problem, but not enough to fix either problem. And I think that's the really interesting is how these rosters are constructed. And then that could really change the dynamic of what type of team you are ultimately, and then what style of play. And it's so intricate. Yeah.
Yeah. So big performers on the night. Obviously TJ Malone finally showed up. I thought, coming in, he was going to be their bright spot. And then he was pretty quiet in game one, and then he showed up and showed out today. He had 10 points on 6 goals and 4 assists, set a single game record that then later in the game Matt Campbell broke, because Matt Campbell ended with 11 points on 5 goals, 1 2-point goal, and 4 assists. But Matt Campbell did it almost quietly. They even talked about it on the broadcast. He was doing it kind of within the flow of the game, and so you didn't think too much about it, and then suddenly you looked up and you were like, wow, he's just scored 10 points, he's just scored 11 points, whereas TJ Malone, I think, was part of that kind of initial explosion, and it was like oh, he's playing like up to what we thought he would do. Anyone
Well, I think what's interesting is both of those guys leading their way. And if you look at both Campbell and if you look at both Malone, their scoring isn't necessarily the goals that put them over the top. It's that they both had 4 assists. So you look at both of those guys, they're getting it done by putting it in the net. Campbell had 5 goals, and a 2-pointer. So he had 6 goals, but then he had the 4 assists, where everyone else on his team was at 2 and 1. And then same thing with Malone is, he had 6 goals, but then he had 4 assists, and everybody else on his team was at, 2 and 1, maybe 3. So I think the assists for both of those guys are just a major thing that jumps off the stat sheet for me. It's like there's tons of guys putting the ball in the net, but then these guys that are dishing it out at a higher rate than each other are clearly, this is the 1 and the 2 for the day. And it's that 4 assists versus, everyone else is getting 4 and 2, 3 and 2, 3 goals, 2 assists, 4 goals, 2 assists. But that 4 assist piece is a major, bump on the chart to really put you ahead of the game. You score 1 or 2 more than everybody else. That's great. But when you throw 2 and 3 more assists than everybody else, now you're just responsible for such a bigger piece of the pie. I think that's kind of what jumped off the page, is both of those guys being their leaders in goals and assists. Yeah. Not one or the other, but both.
Both, yeah. Well, and to that point, I think, the plan clearly for everyone playing the Cannons has been make Asher Nolting a goal scorer. Don't slide to him. Don't let him tear you apart. If he scores 8 goals, cool. As long as he's not getting assists, which is what happened last night. It's what happened last year. I think last night I think he had 8 points, but only 1 of those was an assist. Your point, getting Matt Campbell started also got Marcus Holman going. Marcus Holman finished with 9 points, 5 goals, 1 2-point goal, and then he had 2 assists. So that's my golden stick pick. So I was glad to see him actually getting some stuff, because he was relatively quiet last night. But yeah, to your point, opening that up does so much for both of those teams, and in terms of getting the ball moving and getting it in and out of sticks. The only probably other player that I wanted to note was Will Mark in goal. He got the start. I think Krebs had the start in game 1 and didn't super impress. So they went with Will Mark tonight. He finished with 13 saves. He was only at 30%, which obviously is not great. I do always have to remind myself that the average, the PLL average in sixes is about 40%. So, you're used to seeing like field statistics, and you want a goalie that's maybe more around 60. So you see 30 and you're like, what the hell? But
that's what we were saying earlier, is their job is just so much harder here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and what's funny to me is, again, that PLL average is 40. So 30, you think, okay, yeah, he didn't play very well, but I think most people were watching that game thinking he was playing really well. Right. That they just, to your point earlier, they weren't doing, especially as the game went on and things started to get more and more out of hand. That defense, there were so many guys just like wide open in front of the net. Like, right. He's not going to save them, but he did steal a few. He grabbed a few.
See, that's what to me is important about sixes from the goalie play. I think when you look at, college, field, PLL, and all that stuff with a real defense in front of you, where the game's a little bit less transition-y and a little bit, I hate using the phrase cherry picking, because it's not cherry picking. It's just really good outlets and really good breaks and good timing and great subbing, right? Like, so other people will say, I see a bunch of cherry picking. I'm like, I see like really smart play. And I also see a lot of times bad subbing on the defensive end. But I think for, when you look at the big picture goalies and field game and stuff like that, like you said, it's about that save percentage being, definitely over 50, creeping towards 60. Those are the ones. Where in sixes, I think it's more about how many saves you get, not the save percentage. It's about how many saves you get. And then, like you said, how many 3 or 4 timely robberies did you get? Because the timely robberies are huge. So it's not really about how many and what percentage. It's more about when and where did you get them? Did you get them to stop some runs? Did you get them in a couple spots to help you get a run? Did you help the swing versus, looking at the whole save percentage? So again, like you almost look at the position, which this is what we say is like the goalie position is the same position as the field game, but it's just a very different way of looking at that position, and the productivity is different. And what is a really good all-star in sixes would never fly outdoor and field if you look at percentages and things like that. So I think it's about, like you said, A couple robberies here and there is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Again, you'd probably like that percentage to be a little bit higher, meaning he's maybe making some saves that you would think maybe putting it on him is a little bit too much. But if his percentage is higher, then maybe your defense is playing a little bit better. He's seeing easier shots to save. Like I said, 30% didn't feel like a lot was really on his shoulders with how many guys were just, they're sliding early, almost kind of creating offense and leaving the guy, right in front of the crease wide open and stuff. So, I thought he played really well. I think most people who watched that game would think that he played really well. 13 saves is one of the higher save numbers, which I think goes to your point of like the number of saves is often a little bit more indicative of how they were playing. It's kind of if you made 13 saves, but you only saved 30%, it tells a story that you were getting peppered.
Yep.
A lot. So yeah, I predicted this would be a 26-17 game. And for a while, I didn't even think, the Whips were going to get to 20 goals, which is insane considering it was 15-15 at half. To not hit 20 after you hit for 15 in the first half. I was like, for a while, I thought, oh man, my 20 to 26-17 prediction looks pretty good. But then the Cannons kind of overshot that a little bit. Right. I don't know, just before we move into the WLL game, I don't know if you heard this. It kind of flew under the radar a little bit. It came out during the post-game press conference during the Whips portion. Coach Stagnita essentially leaked that Kyle Bernlohr is retiring. That is one of the reasons why. That's one of the reasons why they started Will Mark. Jim Stagnita in his post-game press conference, what he said was essentially that they have a goalie retiring, so they have an open spot, and they are, essentially auditioning for that. So that's why they gave Will Mark the start and wanted him to look. So, that
makes sense.
Yeah. It's one of those things. I think most of us who have heard that news were shocked in the moment. Like your immediate thought is like, wait, what? Kyle Bernlohr's retiring? Right. But the more you kind of sit with it, you're like, no, I mean, it makes sense. He's coming off of an injury. He essentially lost his starting spot to Brennan Krebs. I think he is good enough that I thought he would stick around for another year or two, maybe look to be like Jack Kelly was. Jack Kelly tore his ACL in 2018 and lost his spot to Tim Troutner in the first season of the PLL. And then, ultimately came back. What was that? Two seasons ago, got his starting spot back, and Tim Troutner got traded because of it. So I thought maybe there was a chance for that, because I still think Kyle Bernlohr is one of the best goalies out there. But he is, I didn't realize he's 30. He's 32, coming off of some serious injuries. And the word is that he's looking at, I don't know if he is currently coaching or if he's looking at getting into it. So that's always one of those things where it's like, you start getting up there, the money's probably not as worth it as much anymore. And you start looking at other things. So, yeah, it seems like something that makes sense. Again, the more you think about it.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
So let's talk WLL. For anyone who doesn't know, Coach Kacy is a women's lacrosse coach. I feel bad. I feel almost like I'm limiting you if I say that, because you are so much more than that. But you do have a specific expertise in the women's game, yes. which is great, because we're I feel like I am trying to learn it constantly, and the WLL and this has been like such a specific, unique experience for me to like be able to sit down and learn. I was saying earlier this week, like I couldn't even make predictions because like I just don't know. I know I know a few of the kind of big names, but like honestly, if you told me Alex Ostholmen was a defender, I'd have been like, oh, okay, cool. Like I didn't even know. I knew who she was, but I didn't really know who she was.
And I think that's really the big positive here with the WLL and the whole new format and the new management and the new ownership and the new league, because let's just think about it, like in terms of like viewership and getting people exposure, like the way you're doing this Gold Rush, the podcast now covering the WLL only because it's connected with the PLL. If this was a PLL and the old league was still running, you probably wouldn't even cover it because it's a whole nother subscription. It's a whole nother entity. It's a whole nother format, where now the way the PLL and the WLL are doing it on joint nights, even if you're not a girls lacrosse fan, the PLL game ends, you go grab a drink, go to the bathroom, you come back, the WLL's on. And now you're like, I just watched sixes. Let me check out girls sixes. And now all of a sudden you're 2 quarters in, where if we had the 2 separate leagues still, the PLL game would have ended. You would have went to the bathroom. You would have gotten a snack, and you'd have came back, and another sport, North Dakota State basketball would have been on, and you would have never seen the girls game. So I think that this is one of the major benefits to the WLL being, kind of under the PLL umbrella, is that you have these joint adventures. You have the championship series going on at the same time as the championship series, where if it was the other league, you'd have the men's championship series going on and no women's pro lacrosse would be going on right now. So I think the way it's structured now is a major advantage, because now we have someone like you that follows the men's game so closely and is an expert in the men's game. You can become a women's fan much quicker, faster, easier than it was when it was separated, and you'd have to go out of your way to learn that new subject of girls lacrosse. So I think this new format is amazing. I think it's awesome. I think just the quality is better. I've watched every women's pro league. I'm back as far as the WPLL, the AU, the Athletes Unlimited, the UWLX. Like, I've watched them all. I actually have an old school hoodie from the first women's league. It's been signed by pro players from all the different pro leagues because it kept changing. Mm-hmm. But so I've seen it all. But the quality of the game, the broadcasting, these girls are coming out in the games with, light shows and smoke. And I know that doesn't mean anything to the game, but like, you got to keep, it's like anything. You got to keep your athletes happy. You got to keep your employees happy. And when they feel special, the product in the field is different. The coverage is different. I love the new, the old league wasn't a team format. I love the team format. I think we're seeing the benefit of that in sixes. So I really think it's awesome. And I think this new format allows someone in the guys game that's traditionally rooted in the guys game to now become a quicker, faster fan of the women's game. The only drawback I see to it is, like, my wife is the reason I got into girls lacrosse, and she heard them call walling in the game last night. And she's like, what the heck is walling? And I was like, it's shooting space. She's like, what do you mean it's shooting space? Shooting space is shooting space. I said, no, they call it walling now, and it's a penalty. She's like, well, how come I'm not getting a shot? And I said, walling is shooting space, but the penalty for shooting space or walling is now a penalty, not a free position shot. But I could tell to a traditional women's lacrosse mind, she was like, wait, why did we just change shooting space to walling? How did we just change its name? But it is a little different.
Well, and my understanding, and again, you are the expert. I will default to you and your wife, all of that. But my understanding was that they have shooting space and walling, that they both exist. They both are similar but sort of separate things. But most of what has been called was walling, though I think I have heard 2 shooting space calls as well. There was one, or maybe yes. I don't remember any shooting space. There was a few walling. And then was there one? Is it shooting space on when you follow through, or no? Because
So
that's on the offense.
That's on the offensive player. So that's dangerous. Yeah, that's a dangerous shot.
Dangerous
and
shot.
That's what Alex Holman got called for tonight, and you get ejected for that.
Well, hers was on the shot.
Yes, hers was a shot, but you can also follow through and hit them when you follow through.
There was one last night, I think, where a girl got hit with the stick on the follow through.
So that's a penalty, not an ejection, expulsion or whatever. Yeah, so they differentiated that. But again, like they don't have. I mean, look at the girl that got hit tonight. Donovan. She got. There's no helmet. Like the goggles literally protect your eyeballs and your eyeballs only. Everything else is wide open. So those rules are there for safety. And you even heard it in the Holman call. You had Donovan came down in the crease, but because the person she was guarding was behind the cage, it was a foul on her. You're not allowed in the crease if you're covering someone behind the cage. So that was a foul on the defender, and then Holman hit her with the shot. So it was simultaneous, like a 1-and-1. They both got charged with the foul, but Holman's is an expulsion foul, so she's got to go, where the other one would have been a different, change of possession.
I know a lot of I think newer people, certainly people who are more fans of the men's game, who where obviously we don't have these kind of rules, seem to bump a lot against on that whole on the whole situation. And somewhat in their defense, it was very bang bang, because she was on ball. She was guarding on ball. She starts moving through the crease. You're saying that's not allowed, but I saw lots of people doing that, cutting through across the front when the person they were guarding had the ball and went through X, they would cut across crease, which is fairly common in the men's game. If you're especially if you're kind of trailing the guy and he comes around X, it's fairly common for you to cut through. It's why we, as an attackman, we wanted to see that, because the second I hit that, the second you kind of jump across, I'm going to switch back because I know you got to, try and follow me around and stuff. I saw it several times, and I thought it was a legal play. Obviously, we probably all need some clarification on the WLL rules. But the thing that got me the most, I thought, was the complaints that I heard was that a lot of people didn't seem to understand, and I'm not phrasing this as a question, but I am asking it. As I understand it, there is an element of responsibility on the shooter in women's lacrosse that is not prevalent in obviously men's at all. And I felt like I was explaining that to so many people on Twitter of like, everyone's like, oh, well, what's she supposed to do? Not shoot? Yes.
In a way. So that's like in the women's game, outdoor, that's where you would see players pump fake it and hitch to show the ref, I would have shot here if it wasn't for Neil standing in my way. And that's when the refs in the outdoor game will blow the whistle, and that's when you get awarded that shooting space, and then you get to go to the 8 for your free position. So that's where that pump fake comes in, and that's kind of like that with restraint. Like they gotta that restraint to be like, I want to shoot this so bad, but I just can't, because ultimately it comes back on me. And I think in the Alex Holman situation, like it kind of was a catch, not even a full crate on a shot. Like you said, bang, bang.
Of a quick set.
And to be honest with you, I've always said, like, I'm just shocked that more girls don't get hit by more shots. Like, I'm actually shocked that that's, one of the first girls to really get drilled, with a shot in a dangerous area of the neck and face. Like, I'm baffled. Like, I've always said, like, it's going to be a one really bad injury, and then people are really going to look at the rules and wonder if, how do we prevent that from happening? But it does ultimately, even in outdoor and sixes, in the women's game, it does come down to the shooter has to make the responsible, safe decision to let it fly or not. But again, that girl, she was on ball behind the cage, and then all of a sudden she's right in the shooting path, and she was jumping So like,
Yes.
I think she tried
Yeah.
to knock down the pass. So again, you're in the air. You're not on the ground. You don't have the ability to duck out of the way. I think it was a crazy timing situation. But yeah, I mean, that's why that rule can be called then, because no matter what, a ref could say, ultimately it's your responsibility not let that one fly. Somebody got hit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was kind of what I arrived to was the thought of like, I wish it doesn't seem like there's much leeway for kind of a ref's discretion. Like the rule is written, you take the shot, you hit somebody, this is the penalty. And so it feels almost like I'm sure the rationale is we're writing it this way so that people are not hit. Player safety is obviously paramount. And so we're writing the rule this way to make it such a harsh penalty that you think of that every time you rear back. But it did feel like this was one of those situations where you wish there was some kind of ref's discretion available, because it felt so much like one of those things where it wasn't really anyone's fault. Like you said, she's on ball, she's covering.
It's not like she had two cradles to look and think and was in the middle of a move. She literally caught, kind of like a hockey one-timer, the quick stick we have in lacrosse, but it was a quick, powerful stick because, they're way more skilled than they used to be. So that little quick stick has some zip on it. And, I think she got hit like right around here. It could be a soft shot. That hurts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, I agree. Like, that's, and they did a little bit something interesting with the sixes where it's, if you hit a defender above the knee,
right.
Where in outdoor, you could hit someone in their pinky toe. If it touches them, you're out. So that's kind of like one of those things where I think the sixes and the new rules is something that they tried to, even though it's, you're from your foot to your knee, they're saying is safe. But again, like those are probably incidental ones, a high to low shot or a low to low release. They're less dangerous. But I think that's the way of the PLL, which we've seen how they test rules out and they're pushing the rules and they're trying different things in the PLL and they try different things in past. I think in past championship series, they've tried some different rules that didn't transfer over. So to me, it's like they did this is like, hey, in the outdoor game, if you hit anybody, it's a penalty that's a little bit excessive. So we're going to go from the knee up. And now, maybe this is something that after the championship series, they go to something more along the lines of what you said, like, hey, we're going to stick with the knee up as expellable, but also reviewable should there be a bang, bang, complete accident, no way to avoid it type situation. So I think, again, the WLL or the championship series is a nice little way for the PLL to give their ideas and to work with the WLL minds and the women's minds and maybe start to kind of mesh some things that sometimes, like everything else, could be a horrible rule change and it gets changed back next year. Or, hey, we're on to something. Let's keep tweaking until we find it. So I think that's where, again, the union of the PLL and the WLL can be super beneficial because, as from a women's coaching standpoint, a guy in the women's game, there's a lot of super archaic things. I mean, very archaic in general. So, and if I'm the one that's trying to voice it, around me, they're going to be like, oh, you're crazy. But, maybe the PLL who owns the WLL and is helping maybe that's the bridge that ultimately leads to some really good change or some experiments that don't work out. And, again, I think the PLL has always done a good job of, saying, hey, that didn't work. That's not the right move. Change it back or fix this or change that. I think I don't think they make silly rule changes and let them ride out for very long.
Some people might argue the face-off rules are a little bit goofy, and they just keep riding those. But yes, generally, I think I'd agree.
Face-off is always weird, man. You got half the world trying to get rid of it, and you got the other half trying to reinvent it. It's crazy.
Yeah. Before we get just into the specifics of the game, I'm curious. While we're talking about these penalties and stuff, I'm curious, coming from the world that you come in, what you have thought of kind of the overall play structure of play, I guess is more about what I'm asking in terms of penalties, flow. So I know I think it was better tonight, and maybe that's part of it is refs are learning. This is new to them as well. I know especially that first night
that was rough.
It was rough, and it felt like there was so much happening that was getting called, little ticky tack. Again, player safety is an even higher importance in the women's game because they don't have the equipment and protection that the men do. And I understand that, and I'm for that. But there was a lot of interrupting kind of the flow of the game for kind of nothingness, off ball or two girls ran into each other, just kind of insignificant stuff flowing. I'm wondering, again, coming from, I'm not super into the women's game, but I remember when what's it called? Free play?
Yep.
Is that what it is? That was just
free movement. Free movement was
free
huge.
movement. Yes.
That was huge.
That was not that
no
long.
brainer.
5 years ago.
That was most. A no brainer. And I couldn't believe the whole idea of, placing your sticks on the ground and freeze, don't move is wild. Free movement changed the women's game monumentally. That was probably one of the biggest, most influential rule changes of all time for the women's game.
When was that? It wasn't that long ago.
6 years ago, 7 years.
Maybe 6.
I don't. If it was longer than that, then time really flies.
I really
definitely seems like a more recent thing. Maybe 6 or 7. Time does fly.
I got really heavily into like the lacrosse kind of social media space in 2016, and I know it's been since I did it. Like I remember when
I want to say like 18 was like a probably thing. Like 18.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So right around there. Six.
You're about right. Yeah.
So again, all that to say, what have you kind of overall?
So I think the women's game is tougher to officiate. I think they have a really tough job because what I notice is, in the beginning of the games, I'm not saying it's ref one way or one side or the other. I think it's just ref a certain way in the beginning of the game. But I think towards the end of the game, you start to see things that were or weren't called earlier, but it's the same thing. And what I do think is as the game intensifies throughout the game, I think some of the pushes get a little more intense from the defense. And then you start to see some of the offensive players kind of like losing the ball. And I think you see them kind of giving the refs, kind of like a look like that's a foul. And I think it's not just the referees either. You got to remember, these girls are coming from the only other game they know is college women's lacrosse, which can be real ticky-tack or real subjective. So when they come here, the WLL, in my opinion, wants to let them play a little bit. But their whole life, this stuff never flies. Like all this hand play checking on their hands is brand new to these women. So I think in the beginning of the games, they let them get away with a lot. But I also think in the beginning of the game, the pushes are a little lighter and the hand checks are a little lighter. But as the game intensifies, those hand checks get a little bit slappier, a little bit more aggressive, and the pushes become a little bit more aggressive, and the reaching and the slashing becomes a little bit more aggressive. And now all of a sudden the referees are kind of getting these looks and the game's getting intense, and they know that looks like a foul, and now all of a sudden they're starting to like almost tighten up on what they're calling, but after it's already intensified. So I think, and again, none of those pushes would be called in the men's game. None of those, they call a lot of holds you'll see in the WL, a lot of holds. But really, none of those would be a hold in the men's game. What it is they're checking down on the stick or the hands, and then they stay down and in their hands and in their stick. So now it becomes a hold. Where in the girls' game, they want a check and a quick pullback. They want the checks to be short and sweet. That you can't, where in the guys' game, we would clamp on someone's hands and then stay in their gloves. Like you hear it all the time with men's coaching, get in their hands, work their hands, stay in their gloves. Well, technically that same phrase in the women's game is being called a hold. So you see things like that where I do think it's harder to ref the women's game because in that regard, we said the shooting, the dangerous shot, like there's no gray area.
Right.
Where in this, there's a lot of gray area on what's a hold, what's a clean check, what's a slash, what's not a slash, what's a push and what's not a push, and what's cross. There's a lot of gray in the women's game. So I do think you're trying to let them play. You're also trying to keep their hands, which are ungloved, safe, and the players, which are unpadded, safe. But that's a sliding scale. Letting them play probably leans more towards dangerous play. Yeah. And then like calling too much leans towards, wow, I'm stopping this game every 2 seconds. So I do think the women's game, the women's ref, and even the women's players have just they're all walking their own fine line. Defenders are walking a fine line. Shooters are walking a fine line. Should I let it fly or should I worry about safety? And then you got these refs walking fine lines. So anytime someone gets off the fine line, all of a sudden you got upheaval and disgruntled people. And I saw it tonight. You could see some players starting to look at the ref after what they thought were fouls and give them a look. And then the next time down, all of a sudden that foul's called. Like, I get it. I think it's a more difficult job. And I don't know that they'll ever get it right. And this is where the guys will say, put them in pads and make it easier. But that's not the women's game. So it's a slippery slope, man. It is for the women's game. It is slippery.
Do we have time to get into that?
Oh yeah.
I'm curious.
I got you.
Okay. All right. I'm curious your perspective on that conversation. I know we have a game to get to, but I'm curious your perspective on that conversation, being a women's coach, having been a women's coach for a good while now, having seen the game transition from, like we talked about the pre-free movement era and moving on. And the idea of, walking that line between player safety versus keeping the women's game the women's game. I know so many women who don't want pads. Like they want to play women's lacrosse. They love women's lacrosse.
I think you would kill the women's sport if you put high schoolers in full pads. I think you'd kill the women's sport. I think, and it's even on a more granular level. I don't know that like my high school players, for instance, I don't know that they would get excited to be fully padded up. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the game could stay the same. You could have all the same rules, but they're padded for safety. I don't see the girls rushing to putting on shoulder pads and elbow pads and being excited about it. Now you have kids that play box and that's awesome, but that's like box lacrosse. They're playing women's box lacrosse. Just like same thing. You got women that play ice hockey, but you don't have tons of women flocking to ice hockey. And I don't know that it's because of the pads, but I think there is something to the women's game where my girls feel like warriors putting on just their goggles, just their ponytail and saying, let's get after it. So I think there's kind of that. I think if you started putting helmets on them and pads, I think you kind of take the look away from the women's game. And I think that would go far. I think enrollment would drop, to be honest. I've thought about this for years. I think if you said, well, women's lacrosse is just men's lacrosse played by women, I think enrollment would fall through the floor. I think it would kill the whole game in general. But I do think, like you said, safety is safety, right? And it's like, how can I take into account, how does this look and how cool is it when I'm talking about safety? Safety doesn't have a coolness factor to it. It doesn't have a look to it. Safety is safety. And the argument always comes down to, referees need to become more educated, need to be more trained. They need to be more consistent. And then the other argument will be coaches need to coach better technique, better safe play, all of that. But I think where the issue is, just like any other sport, there's not a bunch of knowledgeable women's lacrosse coaches sitting around volunteering their time at the youth level, so on and so forth. So if you have volunteer parents that don't know the women's game, how can they? You're asking them a lot. You're asking them to become an expert of the game, put in as many hours as I do, so that they can then teach proper safe technique. And that's a lot because sometimes they're just trying to manage a team and make sure their kid has a team to play on and they volunteer. So it's kind of both ways. You want refereeing to be more consistent, better trained. Again, same thing. We don't have a ton of referees just sitting around. Referee shortage is a problem with every sport. So I think it's going to be constantly a point of emphasis. I think it's going to constantly be, something that is always being worked on. I don't know that we'll ever reach it. I think ultimately we have a lot of responsibility in the girls' game, from the player to make safe plays, safe decisions, coaches to teach that, and referees to ref that. Where in the guys' game, I don't know that my players have to think about safety. If I shoot and you get hit, hey, sucks for you, buddy. Guess you won't get in front of my shot again, and the next one's going in, and I'll bomb away all day. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then same thing, like, I've always, you got deep holes that a lot of times aren't really that athletic. They're just very aggressive and hacks. So they're not carried about safety. And then ultimately the rules are, even though they're a little bit gray, they're a little bit more, yes, that slash hit his helmet. So it's a slash. But you know how it is in the men's game. You're yelling slash, slash, and the refs are like, that's a brush. That's a brush. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that. But again, if you brush my face, I didn't get hurt. You brushed my face mask. Where if you brush my face in the women's game, I probably have a bloody lip. So it's definitely, it's an ongoing thing. I mean, I have a mandatory rules meeting coming up next week, and they're going to tell me all the point of emphasis rules. And then as soon as we get to 3 games into the season, that point of emphasis isn't being emphasized. And I'm out there yelling, point of emphasis, vertical stick, hard. And they're just looking at me like, go ahead and say point of emphasis one more time, and I'll get you a card and get you out of here. But I'm like, we had to sit in that mandatory meeting, and you told us what the point of emphasis was, but we're not calling it today. So it does get gray fast in the women's game. Yeah. Yeah. And to clarify, I'm not saying that there are no women who want to be padded up. There's definitely some. Women's box is popping, man. I'm a big believer in women's box. I think the women's box game can change your game from a women's perspective and make you a way better player. But I mean, you look at Charlotte North was on the field tonight. She played in the World Box Lacrosse Championship. She was one of kind of the stars of that gold medal winning team. And I don't know that she wants women's lacrosse to become padded up, men's lacrosse either, even though she still plays that. Correct. Maybe she does. I can't speak for her. And at the same time, think about this. Charlotte is the women's game's best outside shooter. She's the most lethal outside shooter. She also has the most powerful shot and can cause the most bodily harm with her shot. But if you watch, for instance, in her game tonight, she's very smart about when and where she pulls the trigger. I've always said, Charlotte hits somebody, we're going to have a major discussion about rules and safety. But Charlotte, I've never seen her actually pull like a questionable shot. So that goes to the point of, you can put the emphasis on athletes to be responsible with their shooting, and they can be, because Charlotte's doing it. And then you go to the Holman thing. I don't think that was an irresponsible shot. I think that was for lack of a better terms, is a perfect alignment of bad things that happened at the exact same time. But I don't think that was a dangerous shot. I don't think that it was a dangerous shot. I think it was wrong place, wrong time accident, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, imagine if you put the phrase wrong place, wrong time accident in the rule book, we'd have all hell breaking loose. Right. That's way too wild. I'm so glad that you brought up Charlotte North, because that was where my idea of, again, it's not like I've read a women's rule book, but I was watching Charlotte North last night and again tonight, and I watched how many times she pulled up for a shot that in a men's game she would have taken without hesitation. And she pumped. I watched her one time do a full jump, like she was going to take her jump shot, and just pull it down and keep it, and pull it down and keep it. And it was like, yes, clearly there is an emphasis on the shooter being in control and not taking a shot when there is someone in the way. And even the follow through. Imagine, because Charlotte sometimes has the window to release the ball, but I think sometimes she keeps it, because even if I release this ball, I can't follow through. I'm going to hit this girl in the hands on my follow through. Mm-hmm. So again, she's a very good example. She is very smart about her shots. She's not out there shooting dangerously. And if anything, she should have the most responsibility, because her shot can cause the most damage. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So she's very responsible with her shooting selections. Very responsible.
One more rule point before we I swear we are going to talk about this game. Last night we realized that in the WLL there is no 2-point shot. That line may as well not be there.
Right.
And obviously, I think it's pretty obvious. The thought there is not to incentivize the distance shots. My question, though, is we didn't really de-incentivize those shots. Allie, I know you and Allie have worked together for years. She was ripping them last night.
Should have got twos.
Right. And so my thing was, you didn't really, you haven't really discouraged people from shooting them. You have just taken away the reward for being able to shoot them,
because they're still shooting the two, and again, those are Allie didn't shoot irresponsibly from beyond the arc. They're responsible lanes, so you should get the two. I think I think the idea of de-incentivizing the deep shot was a safety decision. Yes. But I think where they also helped themselves out, and maybe they could let the two fly, let the 2-point arc be real, because what I like about the WLL rules is if you are 5-on-5, you are not allowed to play zone. Right. I think that's where the dangerous comes in, because now think about it. If you want, let's say the 2-point shot was a part of the women's game and you wanted to use that as part of your strategy, like just look at the game tonight. The Charm could have used a tour at the end. That could have been part of their game plan in the last 3 minutes. Hey, we're going to have to set up our 2-point shooting play. But what I like about this is if the 2-point is part of the game and it's part of your strategy in the women's game, because they're making you play man-to-man, you could design that look in a way to allow your shooter to have a clean lane. Don't have anyone at X. Have them make the motion so that when the ball gets to Charlotte for the two, the other people have cleared through. And now by rules, the defenders should have come with you, which would give you an open lane. But if you let them stay in zone, which they don't allow you to do, that's when you can run that play. And now Charlotte has to shoot into someone who's sitting in a zone, where in the men's game, we can just shoot that. And we don't care if you get hit. So I think because they made the man-to-man rule, that's also helping safety, right? Because no offensive player would be standing in front of Charlotte who's winding up for a two. Therefore, no defensive player should be in that spot. So by making them play man-to-man, I think they've made the game safer by forcing them to play man-to-man, because now you can clear lanes to shoot the two ball, which, like you said, Charlotte's shooting from two. There was a couple girls shot from two. And the interesting thing about that is I'm pretty sure that I almost want to say in the Unleashed event, that all-star event that the PLL hosted with the women's, I thought they allowed 2-pointers in that game, because I'm pretty sure I saw like Megan Kinna drop a 2-bomb from deep. So it's interesting that they allowed it. I think they allowed it in that Unleashed game, but then they don't allow it in the WLL rules. But I'm with you. They're shooting the two. They should get the two. They weren't dangerous 2 balls that went in. They were safe 2 balls that went in. So they should be 2. And I think the reason that you're seeing those safe 2 balls and those safe 2-point shots is because of the man-to-man rule, which forces you to follow and play man-to-man, which creates safer lanes. The zone is where I think dangerous lanes are. People popping in and out of the zone. You don't see the backside zone coming in to check middle, and you're releasing a shot. And you didn't see her because she shouldn't have been there, but it was a good zone check-in. I think the man-to-man rule is a safety rule as well, even though I don't know if they meant it to be a safety rule, but I think by forcing them to play man-to-man, player-to-player, and not sit in a 5-on-5 zone, I think they have made the game safer. Therefore, like you said, and again, this is what's nice about the championship series. Maybe I'm hoping somebody's job is to go look at all shots shot behind the arc. And if there's 10 shots in the end of this championship series that were shot beyond the arc and they were all safe and they should have been 2s, I hope they say, yeah, we looked at the data. There was 10 shots behind the arc in the February championship series and all were safe. Let's give them the 2-pointer. We've looked at the data. We've seen it. The man-to-man rule helps it, and let it go. So I'm hoping that's what they're doing with this championship series, is really digging into the women's side and saying, if we're going to be partnered with the women's game, let's make sure we're looking at this in depth, because I think they figured out men's sixes. I think they figured out PLL for the most part. We could go, you said we go back and forth about faceoffs all the time, but for the most part, they figured out men's sixes and they figured out the PLL league. So I think they should make sure they figure out the women's game and the women's sixes and make sure they figure that out and make the tweaks now in the next year or so that they have a really good product going forward. They can put all the steam behind it.
Yeah. I didn't even think about the zone rule.
Oh yeah, the zone is
how that
danger
that affects. Yeah, but because my thought was still, they still have dangerous shot rules. They still have walling. They still have shooting space. Like the idea that a 13-yard shot is so much more dangerous that we need to de-incentivize it. That, well, I mean, Allie had I think 2 shots from like 12 and a half. Like she's like, her front foot was just across the line. And it's like, we're still taking these shots. All you've done is taking away the reward for being good at that shot.
Right.
So, with that being said, let's actually talk about the game. Kind of close game for a while, a little bit back and forth, but ultimately the Guard kind of pull away and win 18-13. One of the things, again, like we talked about way back when we first started, that I have loved about watching the WLL so far has been there seems to be so much more of a tactical game. We talked about the PLL. Again, I know there are tactics. I'm not saying they're not coaching, but a lot of it seems to be like, okay, these are kind of the principles. These are what our ideas and stuff are, but we're just going to kind of let you guys go play. And the women seem to really have patterns of play and like real strong thought processes. We talked earlier this week about how they seem to almost box-like in offensive and defensive substituting, which you don't see. You see here and there, maybe Rambo ain't necessarily busting back on defense. He's running off, but it's not the whole team where it often is. Barring a free save and a goalie pushing it immediately. Obviously, they'll kind of stay on for that. But any time that they can, they're doing almost whole line substitutions. And then the big one for this game was there was clearly a concern. Alex Holman at X, looking to feed cutters and stuff, which is not really a tactic we've seen. Obviously, the WLL is kind of 2 games into its existence, but it's not really a thing we've seen in sixes generally, to the point where I have seen people say, get rid of the space behind the goal because, people aren't using it. So that was a big one. And she ended up with 5 points on a goal and 4 assists and missed
countless other assists.
A good chunk of that game.
Yep.
So
I think the reason you see that more in the girls' game is because traditionally, up until again recently, like here's another crazy rule changes. Up until a couple years ago, women's defenders could not go through the crease. So traditionally, as a women's defender, you could not step in the crease, and you also traditionally don't play behind the cage. You don't go behind. Now, once they started letting you cut through the crease, colleges started to play behind the cage. But traditional women's lacrosse in the past, you basically got behind the cage to X, and it was like free home base. Defenders just stayed up and around the top of the crease and let you sit back there all the time. So on my team, my high school team, we literally call it the Tom Brady. If you let Tom Brady sit in a clean pocket for 7 seconds, 8 seconds, 9 seconds, 10 seconds, he will find somebody open.
Yeah.
You're never going to let Tom Brady sit in a clean pocket. But in the traditional women's game, if an offensive player got behind the cage, you let them sit there forever until they found the cutter. Now we go behind and pressure that person. But I think in the women's WLL game, there's a little bit more of a tendency that sometimes people get behind there. Like if you notice, Alex Holman was back there by herself, casually finding feeders, because now it's like, I don't want to go this way. I'll flush her, because they're not as comfortable going behind. where we've grown up that way, you know, finding a way, I go this way, goalie plays me that way, we trap, and then I get on and we play from there. So I think you notice when Alex would get to X, a lot of times she had no pressure and she got to sit there and beat Tom Brady in a pocket with no pressure. But I agree with you. You don't see that much in the guys game because usually a defender is attached on you before you get to X, and they don't stop. They stay on you.
Right.
Or in the girls game, we have a little bit more of a tendency to slack off at X and play in front of the cage or give you that free space. So I think that is a little bit of a nuance to the game, that's just kind of more of the traditional women's game, staying still involved in the current version of the game. Where, like I said, there was a time where if you just cleared the ball and got to X, you got free base. Like everyone just let you sit there. You go back there all day, tie your shoe if you want, pitch a tent, have a picnic, whatever you want back there. It's crazy. So I think that's kind of like the traditional women's game still kind of hanging around. But I do think I think that was huge for the Charm because I kind of mentioned this earlier with the guys game. The Charm roster to me is very heavily geared towards defense. So when you look at their roster, you've got, like you said, it's almost built to have the full changes. Because you have so many, you got defensive legends on that team. Like Meg Dowdy is Team USA gold medal, like literally the GOAT, and she's a defensive player. Now in high school, she played midi, right? But that doesn't mean she's a WLL midi. And in that roster, same thing. You got Lizzie Colson, you saw her in transition, you saw her playing offense, but you also could see where she's not really an offensive player all the way. She's got the skills to get to the cage. She can score in transition, but her dodge game is a little bit different. So with the Charm specifically, I think they're, like we said earlier, I think they're very strong defensively. Their roster is a defensive built roster, but I think their issue going to be going forward here, like they're 0-2 now. I think their real problem is that they're just kind of void of some offensive playmakers. Yes, we have Sydney Black who can get it done and she can beat people and she can win matchups. Okay. But Alex Holman is not a Dodger. She can feed, which was very much needed tonight because her assisting from the cage, and I even wrote down in my notes, third quarter, 3:55 left, Alex Holman expelled from the game for the dangerous shot. And I knew that was going to be the changing point because she was filling in as kind of Sydney Black being Batman. Alex from X with the feed became Robin. And on their team, who else is there to create offense? Like I'd really like to see Grace Griffin dodge more. She, in the first game, was really initiating. Today, I thought she was kind of like, there were periods of the game, and I'm like, they need Grace Griffin out there to initiate opposite of Sydney Black. So now you can dodge two people dodging from both sides, but she was gone for periods of time. And then when she came in, like she didn't really get to dodging. Aurora Cordingley, great college dodger. Would love to see her be more aggressive as a dodger because I think the Charm offense is lacking. They got really good players, but there was a couple shifts tonight. Now, again, Megan Whittle, Maryland's all-time leading scorer, which is crazy because we all think of Taylor Cummings, but Megan Whittle is actually their all-time leading scorer. She's out. So she could be that other offensive piece that they're missing. But right now, I think they're kind of strapped offensively. If it's not Sydney Black getting it done, we need Alex to assist, 5 more times? We need her to find 5 more assists because even though she had a bunch of dimes, it was helping, but it wasn't really enough. Like they cut it close. They never really and then you look at the other side, you got Charlotte can create her own shot. You got Wallach can create her own shot. You got Weeks can create her own shot. Casey Choma and Andy Aldave, that's 5 players right there that can create their own shot. Where Alex Holman isn't really a Dodger. She's not really going to create her own shot. If you give it to her in space, she's a good scorer, right? And she wraps that crease really well. But if you look at game 1 and game today, you'll notice that she needs to take that extra step to greatness. She keeps taking really doorstep shots where she got to take one more. But the Charm just don't have a bunch of people that can create their own shot outside of Sydney and a little bit of Grace Griffin. Where a team like the Guard, I just named 5 players that can definitely create their own shot. And I didn't even mention Dempsey Arsenault's on their team. She can create her own shot. Now we're up to 6. So you got 6 players that can create their own shot versus Charm that's kind of struggling there. But they're built defensively, and that's the only reason they were in that game. Like, they killed that 3-minute penalty easily. Not easily. Yeah. They put their butts off. But that 3-minute penalty could have been like, wow, we lost by 12 today. Because we had a 3-minute penalty and Alex Holman out of the game. So we're losing our number 2 offensive player in this game. We're now man down for 3 minutes, and she's expelled, and we're already down Megan Whittle. Like, that could have been – I actually thought that was where this game was going to get ugly, but their defense was phenomenal. So it's a gift and a curse. The Charm roster is built for defense, and they did that tonight. But their offense is so lacking that they didn't have the offense to get back in. And I don't even think that if they stayed 5-on-5 without that expulsion, without Holman going out, I don't know that they climb back in there. And as the games go on, like, aren't you just going to make sure you take care of Sydney Black a little bit better, like defend her a different way and say, like you said, hey, if these other girls that can't create their own shot, if they beat us, that's great. But we got to stop letting Sydney Black beat us because she's really beating us.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of people are going to say that expulsion was what
I don't think
the Charm lose. That was my thing. I didn't feel
it
like
may have fired them up, actually, because
that's what
that's
exactly
went on fire,
what I felt
that
like.
defense started balling.
Yes, yeah, especially when they closed out that 3-minute penalty, like you said, like it seemed to light a fire of like, oh, we can do that, like we can do this,
and they just ball had to do it.
Right, and they just
bunch of F-bombs in the huddle, and here we come. Right, I love that part.
They just couldn't kind of finish it. I think they got to within 1 at one point, and then it kind of got away from them. I think the having to go as hard as they did to get to that point, I think finally caught up to them, and it ended up being a 5-point game in the end. But I'm with you. I didn't think they looked like they were getting back into the game before that. I thought we ended up in the same play. Maybe it's not a 5-goal game. Maybe it's a 2 or 3 goal game, but I felt like we were going to end up in the same place anyway. Like you said, I think the defense kept them in it for a while, but they never felt like they were ever going to outscore.
They would get their stops, and then they would get the ball to the other side of the field. And it's like, who's going to put this in? If it's not Sydney Black, then who is it? And for a while there, it was Holman feeding people, but then she's out. So now it's like, we got the stop, but who's going to put it in? I mean, there was multiple possessions where I saw 2 and 3 defenders on offense. Yeah. So, like, that kind of goes to show you, like, at this level, like, if you've got 2 and 3 defenders on offense right now, that means that offensive unit is definitely lacking a little bit of production. So I think that roster is I think their roster is the most challenging roster. If I was a coach in this WLL championship series, I think that roster would be the one that you have to do the most work with. In terms of, like, man, we really got to rely on our defense. That's great. That's our calling card. But then we really have to work, super efficient shot selection and finishing on offense, because I just think, I look at that roster offensively and I don't see a bunch of people that can create their own shot. I see great players that in a team setting have all had great careers, but they weren't all people that could create their own offense.
Yeah, and it's such an important part of the Sixers game.
Super important part of the Sixers. You got it.
Yeah, I mean, and we yesterday with the Archers, that's the first time I've ever seen a kind of Joe Keegan push back on me calling them two-way players, because so many of them in the field game play strictly defense. They're short stick defensive midfielders or straight up poles. But in the sense of Sixes, they are two-way players because they're defensive players. But I think each one of them had like 3 points, at least 3 points last night, and it's the first time I've ever seen a defensive kind of team actually like put up numbers and be good going offense. I've always called it the battle for the soul of Sixes, that the World Games 2022 Sixes championship between Canada and US, where Canada was like all offense all the time, and the US was all two-way guys, two-way midfielders, and it was really the battle for the soul, and they just obliterated us. And since then it's kind of been like, some people have tried it again, and it's just never really worked when put up against those teams. If you're playing defense, you can't score, and scoring is the name of the game in sixes. Right. You can try to obviously balance it out, but you have to be able to score. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because again, that's what I'm seeing is the Charm just couldn't score. And again, I didn't think that even without the expulsion, I just didn't see them getting into that game in terms of winning it, keeping it relatively close, sure, but not winning it. So I'm glad to see that someone with some knowledge thought the same thing. The other, or I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about was Haley Waters.
Balling.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the tweet. It was on the broadcast last night, or whenever they played last night. Kaylee, because no, it must have been the first night when the Charm played. I'm like, wait, which team is she playing on? I should probably write that down in my notes better. A buddy tweeted out, and it actually got put on that water covers 70% of the earth. Waters covers the other 30%. She is one of those ones, like we talked about, steals some goals and keeps you in the game that way. And again, back to the defensive thing, you can keep some points off the board, but if you can't put them in on the other end, she made 12 saves and was at 40%, and they lost by 5.
Right.
You can't.
Huge.
Yeah. And then you watch like Taylor Moreno last night, who's doing basically the same thing, but then getting the ball up and out and
creating
offense and
from the goalie spot.
The dimes she was throwing, just absolute.
Oh, yeah.
I made a different reference for your sake, Super Bowl champions. Yeah. Freaking Jalen Hurts out there just dropping it right in the breadbasket.
Into Devontae's hands.
Yeah, and creating not even just creating offense, creating easy offense.
Right.
Like
major advantage.
Yeah, huge advantage. Oh, excuse me. Speaking of, we will. Oh, geez, I'm dying. We will roll right into tomorrow's games. The first game is going to be the WLL game with the aforementioned Taylor Moreno-led Palms playing the Charging. What are you looking at coming into this game? Being the women's lacrosse guy, what should I be looking at?
So I think this is the game that really would tell me a lot about who's probably going to pull away with this thing. I think right now it's a 3-team race. I don't think the Charm have what it takes to get it done. I would say that the other 3 teams are kind of a toss-up here. But I think that this game is probably the game that I would say, looking at the schedule already, this is the biggest matchup for me. I think both teams here in this setup, again, have players that can create offense. I think they have, good defenses, good defenses. But I think that both of these teams have a lot of offensive firepower and have a lot of those two-way mids. Like if you look at the Charging roster, it's offensive player 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of the 10 players are heavy offensive players. So they're good enough two-way mids that they can D up, but they've got a lot of offensive firepower, right? And then I think the same thing, you have really good goalkeeping in both teams, but then I think it's the same thing with the Palms, is you have a lot of offensive firepower, just enough defense to get it done, and a lot of two-way people that can play both sides. But again, great goalie keeping And I think this, to me, is the game that you're looking for is, which one of these teams is really going to pull ahead as the main team out there. I think the Guard are figuring it out. Like if you told me that the Guard win it all in a couple of days, I wouldn't be shocked because they're figuring it out. I think tonight was huge. I think if they would have lost tonight somehow, that'd be a whole different story. But I think they figured out a lot. I think their chemistry is coming together. I think the Palms have a lot of good chemistry to start with. Out of all 4 teams, I think the Palms have the best chemistry to start with. I think the Guard are figuring it out. I think Charging is still figuring it out. I think the Charm, as crazy it is, they got a lot of Terps on there, but again, their chemistry is on the defensive end. And then that offensive struggle is where there's not a lot of chemistry. So that to me is what I think is what you're looking for. These are probably the two better teams at this point. And I would swap out, the Guard and Charging as maybe number 2. I mean, personally, I think the Palms are the best. I personally think that, again, I've worked with players on almost all 4 of these teams, but I think Ali Mastriani is just the complete player. Like, she's a true two-way. Like, she's going to go be your best defender and your best offensive player. And if we included draws in here, she'd be another X factor there. And I think sixes is really going to show the world what Ali can do. Because I think when you get into full field lacrosse, Ali is a very, very, very good team player. Mm-hmm. But I think there's times where she should just step up and be the alpha and say, hey, I get it, team player, but I'm the one. And I think in sixes, you can be the one a little bit better because there's less people to please. There's a little bit less on the clock, so you have less system play, a little bit more of, okay, I got to go here. And I think this format allows for Ali to be like the true, like, dominant player that she is without having to be, and I say this like, I don't want her to not be not a team player because you got to be a team player, but you can also be the one. Like, you can be the one and be a great team player. And I think when she gets into, full field stuff, I think she sometimes is a little bit too much of a team player and a little bit less of, hey, I'm the go-to. So I think this championship series is where I think Ali pretty much is going to be the leader of the Palms, which she is now. I guess she's the captain. But I think just the way she can kind of affect this game with more touches and less people getting touches, I think it's going to allow her to really push them ahead. And I do think they have the best chemistry. Like you even just look at the Charm. Like, how ironic is that the Maryland team, actually their best player today was a Tar Heel in Kaylee Waters. She was a Tar Heel. So they're out there getting their butts saved by a Tar Heel goalie, even though they're supposed to be the Maryland team. Yeah. So I think that's interesting.
I knew even a lot of the women that I knew, like, their name. I didn't really know much about them. I know Ali because as much as you've worked with, again, like you said, people on all of these teams, I know specifically that you have worked with Ali a good amount. And so I knew to kind of be watching her. And that in game 1, I don't think I would have even had to have known. Like, she jumped off the screen and was.
That was a game where she was playing against Charlotte, and I think Ali outscored her.
Yes,
I think Ali ended up being the more offense. And this is my wild prediction. I think Ali wins the Golden Stick.
The Golden Stick.
And I know a lot of people are going to be like, no, it's going to be Charlotte. But in a way, okay, like, Meg Dowdy played Charlotte very, very well tonight. Meg Dowdy played a great defensive game against Charlotte tonight. And then you add on to, if Meg plays a really good game and plays some good defense, and you've got Kaylee Waters back there on fire, that's a situation that doesn't, like, a lot of these goals would have went in, but Kaylee was on them. Mm-hmm. So I think there was a combination there. And in game 1, Kayla Woods played Charlotte very well also, even though Charlotte had, I think she had 5 in that game.
I think she had 5, yeah.
Kayla Woods played her very well. So in a way, Charlotte has very specific patterns of movement. Like, if you watch Charlotte play, she has not, and I want to say predictable. Charlotte is not predictable, but a lot of Charlotte's shots, you'll notice her hands are free for the shot, but somebody is on her body, which means she didn't really get separation. She just got her hands free. And I know in lacrosse we'll say, well, your hands free, that's all that matters. I get it, except for the fact that Charlotte's a power shooter, and if someone's pushing on her hips, you're taking some of that power out of her shot. So in a way, and I'm not saying Charlotte's going to become predictable, but there are certain defenders in this league on these rosters that play Charlotte very well. And with only 4 teams playing, if every team's got one person that can play Charlotte very well, she doesn't have very many, easy outings. I don't think any of the outings are easy, but I think she's the best player. She's drawing the best matchups. But some of these defenders understand her style of play, and they're playing her very well. Like, I thought Meg Dowdy and Kayla Woods have played her very well. A lesser defender on her all game, and she probably had 8 in the first game. And I think tonight she may have had 4.
She had 4 points, 3 goals, 1 assist.
Yeah, so think about it. 3 goals. I think she had over 10 shots. Did she have over double-digit shots? That's like a subpar day for Charlotte. If you give Charlotte 10 shots, she's usually in the 5 or 6 goal range.
She had 11 shots,
11 shots and 3 goals. So that's a combination of Meg playing her really well and then Kaylee Walters making those big saves. And so I think that's going to wear over the next couple of days, where I think Allie, in a way, is a harder matchup to defend because she's big, she's fast, she's tall, she can dodge, she can shoot, she can do everything inside and outside, just like Charlotte can. But Allie's probably a little bit quicker, a little bit faster, that kind of thing. So I think Allie is going to win the golden stick. And I think that'll lead to her team being also the better team.
Yeah. It's, I described it as she looked like Jordan when, I'm sure you watched The Last Dance, and when he talks about even if he had to, he would invent, something to be mad at. And she reminded me of that Allie did watching, because it was like every time Charlotte went and did something, she was like, oh, right. You got that? Oh, look what I got. Like it pushed her, it felt like.
And I think she knows she's the one on that team. I think she knows when she looks at that roster, this is my role. I am supposed to be the 1A, offensive creator here, whether it's give it out, score it, get the defense. I think she knows her role on that team. And I think that also is the way the rosters were constructed. These people have played with each other. They come from the same university. They've probably played at alumni games together. They've played in the pros together. So, it's not like, hey, let's figure out who's the one here. I think past state, everyone's like, yeah, Allie, this is you. And I don't think that's I don't think in that roster anyone else is going to try and say, oh, I should be the one. I don't think there's going to be any type of that strife. I think they've played together. You could hear Allie in the mic'd up clip. In the one clip, I think she went to Sam Geiersbach and said, you're literally the best at dodging under. Go under next time. And I think those are the things that really help, is if you're 1A, your number one person is telling your second and third people to do this. They're like, oh, she's telling me to do that. I'm gonna go for it. And then she's just building that, that confidence in the rest of her teammates. And I think that's going to go a long way.
All right. So clearly it sounds like you have the Palms winning tomorrow against Charging.
I would take the Palms over Charging tomorrow. Okay. I think their chemistry is there from the jump. I think Charging is still figuring it out. I think Boston Guard definitely took a major step in his figuring out. I like the way they play together. Boston Guards have some good spacing and some good movement. And I think that their chemistry's coming along quick. I think Palms just have the chemistry coming in. And you mentioned box earlier too. I really like their coaching staff, because Ginny Cap is Team USA's box women's coach. She's a gold medal box women's coach. And then you've got Adam Sear, who spent time in the college game with Notre Dame. So you have a traditional field lacrosse mind, and then you have a women's box mind. And that to me, this to me is like the what they tried to do with the Chaos, right? They tried to have that was supposed to be the box team, right? That was supposed to be the team that had the box field influence. And I think this is like the box field influence of the women's sixes game here. And I think that'll go a long way because, you have some of these players that played, like Allie played gold medal box under Ginny Cap. So there's already a connection there. They don't have to learn new terminology. She's like, yeah, I already went through a gold medal run with you, so I know what you expect. I know what that means. And then she can help some of her other teammates get on board. Like, hey, when she says this, it means that, and I think their chemistry is there from the beginning. And it's such a short tournament that chemistry goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm there with you on Palms. I'm not going to be probably shocked if it goes the other way. I would expect probably a 2-goal game. The women tend to be slightly less scoring than the men, so an 18-16 kind of game in favor of the Palms, I think, would be kind of what I would expect to see. Moving over to the men's side, we have the Archers versus the Atlas. This is, like you mentioned in the WL, that's
same thing.
Yes, the same thing.
Like, this tell you a lot.
Yeah. I think these are the two that people are already kind of eyeing as being at the end, deciding it, and definitely it's going to, at least, like you said, tell a lot of where these teams lay out. What are you looking at in this game?
So I think if I had to pick a team, I'd say the Archers probably win this. I think they just move the ball quicker, faster. I think their chemistry offensively is just a little bit cleaner. I think, the Atlas, I like everything they're doing. But I think it'll be a close one. But if I had to, I don't know, man. I like the Atlas roster a lot.
I do. Yeah.
I really like the Atlas roster, and I've never been a big Archers guy, but I do. Like, it's crazy how these, I'll go back to the beginning of the PLL, but it's crazy how these teams and the names, like, kind of matched up with the personalities. And the Archers, I've always thought, like, their personality and the team name has always been, like, an awesome mesh. Like, they really are, like, a little sniper gang. Everything's precise. Like, the ball really moves quickly. It's clean. Like they really play like Archers would play. It's weird. So I think that's there, but I really like the Atlas roster. I mean, there's guys like I'm always a big Miles fan. But, like Costa Beal, I mean, he's nasty. So I agree. I think this game could go either way. I really do. I think this one will be a really tight one, but I think this one will ultimately tell you, who it is that's going to be, pulling ahead.
Yeah.
Like, I can see the Cannons in the finals.
Yeah.
I like the Cannons. I'm a big Asher fan.
Yeah.
I love Asher.
Big Asher fan.
I love Asher. I love everything about his game.
Yeah, I
always go to the comments of his highlights and watch people hate on him. Like, this dude does nothing. He just leans on people. I'm like, that. You know what? He does it at a very high level. I don't care what you call it. Stop him, right?
Him.
Like, the dude's the man. I love his game. I love everything about his game. He's so crafty. Yeah. He's crafty without having to do a bunch of stuff. It's like his game is there's so many little things to his game that are awesome.
Yeah, he's great. I'm so torn on this game. It's such a tight game. I think initially my thought was Archers pull it out. I think they just have a little bit more of that offensive firepower that we've been talking about, and again, probably just a little bit more on the defensive end as well. Not much in either direction. And the thing that's really given me pause is, well, I think that's true. I think Liam Intamin in goal is that dude who's going to make all of the saves that you expect him to make, and then he's going to steal a handful. And
he probably is the X factor, to be honest. Right. Now that you say that would make me switch, because you're right. He's balling. And, if all things are equal across the board, like, that's the X factor.
Yes. And that's kind of where I'm.
What he did the other day was crazy. Like,
insane.
Robberies were wild.
Yes, insane. And again, we talked earlier about the the 40% is kind of the PLL average. And if I remember correctly, he was at 57 in a Sixes game. Like, that's insane. So barring that there's some kind of unforeseen collapse out of him, that, you know, the Archers just shoot the lights out, I just don't. I don't know. Like you said, all things being equal, he's that X factor.
That might be the pendulum swinger for me too, is goalie play.
Yeah,
they're both offensive talented. They're both defensively talented. They both playing really good ball. They got, I think, are they the two highest scoring teams so far in the series?
Well, I mean, the Cannons dropped 34 today, but I think one game, having not played not having not played their second games, I think just going off that first game, yes, I think they were both the two highest. And, you know, I mean, part of me feels like 34 goals out of the Cannons is less representative of how good they are than what Atlas and Archers Atlas and Archers did. It is maybe a better representation of what they are. But yeah, no, I don't. Like I said, my first thought was Archers. I think I'm gonna.
You know, I kind of want to switch too. If I was gonna bet, I might pick, because of what you just said, because the data would show that dude's about to play out of his mind.
Yeah.
So if they're going to shoot real well, he's going to counter half, apparently 50% of them in a Sixes game, which is crazy. And that's a crazy X factor. Yeah, I would switch. Yeah. I would say that's got to be the X factor for the Atlas over Archers. But I think this will probably be the best game of the series outside of, you know, when they actually get to playoff.
Yeah. Yeah. The round robin round. Yeah. I would definitely probably agree with you. Trying to think of who's going to be on Saturday. It'll be Archers
charging. Archers and Whip Snake. So that's probably an Archers win. And then Boston and Atlas will be another great game. This is a nice little stretch for them. They could really take some big steps forward. They pick up a win tonight or tomorrow, Friday and Saturday, then they pretty much are saying, hey, this is legit. This is the real deal.
Man. All right. So we both went Palms. We both like both teams, but maybe think Liam Intamin is the X factor.
The X factor, you got it.
I'll get us out of here the same way that we get out today. Right now, who are your picks for champions and Golden Stick for both leagues?
I'm gonna go Palms for the champions. I'm gonna go Ali Mastriani for the Golden Stick. Now that we've talked about this, I'm going to pick Atlas to win it all.
Okay.
But I really think that, like, I know it's crazy, but, like, this dude touches the ball so much. But, like, I don't see why Asher Nolting can't stay hot for a Golden Stick. Because, like you said, if I'm a defense, what I'm going to do? I'm going to get him away from being a feeder, which means he, in theory, if he's finishing, he's scoring, right? And then as soon as you try and stop him from scoring, like he to me is like, you know, Shaq back in the day. If you double down on him, he's going to find a 3-point shooter. If you let him score, he's going to score. So I think between the two games, he's got to be up there between the first game and, you know, a little bit less yesterday or today.
Yeah, the issue is, well, it's scoring points.
Scoring points only.
Yeah, I don't have a full. All I have is it's only listed by points. He is tied with Dylan Malloy and Brian Costabile. The difference is he's played 2 games and they've played 1. He does have, it looks like 7 of his would be scoring points compared to 6 for Dylan Malloy and 5 for Brian Costabile. I discussed, Dylan Malloy, I think a lot of his point, I believe it was 6 of his 8 points were somewhat garbage time.
Okay.
As that game kind of got out of hand, is when he really started scoring. So I don't know that you necessarily think of him as keeping that pace up.
Right.
But I also think a lot of this is going to come down to, you know, who makes it to the championship. Yeah. You know, a lot of it's going to be who has that extra game to play. Because then right there with them is Mac O'Keefe, who, was shooting lights out last night. He's sitting on 6 scoring points as well, and he's only played 1 game. So, we'll like we said about the championship, but also about the Golden Stick. Tomorrow night's game is going to tell us a lot. And that was kind of my idea with checking in every day on who we got. So we went Palms and Asher. Who was the who you got in the championship? You thinking? Did you say? Did I miss it?
Yeah, I would go. I didn't say who I put in the championship. I just said Atlas would probably win it. I just can't really decide who they're playing. Is it Boston or is it the Archers? On my paper initially, I had Boston and Atlas down. But I also think that's just because I've just never been an Archers fan.
Yeah, I've just been an Archers fan. Although I'm probably a little bit of a negative Archers fan. Negative's a bad term. I'm a superstitious Archers fan,
right?
And once they settled into cities, I kind of lost my connection. It was a lot easier to root for a team that didn't have a location for me anyway. Once they became the Utah Archers, I was like, well, I don't have any connection to that.
Right.
So, we'll talk about my fandom at another time. My dark horse was Miles Jones, but he's only got 2 scoring points right now. So barring he has just an insane game.
He took a bunch of good shots. He hit a couple pipes. They just weren't falling. He hit a bunch of really good takes. Like he could have easily went from 2 to 6. He could have easily had a 6-goal game.
Yeah, I thought he probably should have had at least 5.
Yeah, I definitely would say 4. 4 or 5 for sure.
Yeah,
good takes, bunch of pipes, couple saves.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and then I thought he faded a little bit. Yeah, the one issue, I think he has made 4 6s. My one issue is just that level of conditioning needed to just run up and down.
He did play a lot of defense. He got stuck on D a few times.
Yeah,
he got stuck out there a few times in a row. Like there was like 3 D shifts in a row where I was like, "Where D up?"
Yeah. My actual Golden Stick pick was Marcus Holman, who I think is probably unlikely. I mean, he's still in it, I guess, but he, I think it's unlikely. I'm probably going to change it, but it's probably not going to be until tomorrow. And then I had the Cannons winning the championship. I think I'm probably fully off with that after tonight, which is weird because they scored 34 points, the most ever. But I don't know about you. I watched them and I thought this is probably whoever wins tomorrow night is probably number 1. And then it's again, you can probably still have these 2 there, but they're not the number 1 anymore. Right. So that will probably change, but for the sake of changing it today, I'll say I'm changing it to Atlas because of what we talked about. And until the end of the game tomorrow, I think Liam Intamin might just be that X factor. That's the word I'm looking for. For the women, I had Charlotte North and the guard winning mostly because I just didn't know, and Boston is 50 minutes from me. And I
like their roster. I like the guard roster. I think they're figuring it out. And if this is one of those things where if this championship series was like 7 more days, this would all change. Both men's, it could change fast. I mean, you're asking them to create a lot of chemistry in a short period of time. If you gave them 7 more days and 4 more games, I bet you the guard would be creeping up real fast.
I'm quite sure that they, especially with the WLL being brand new, that they wanted both leagues playing both days, so that like you talked about earlier, you watch one game, you go get a snack, you come back, the other league is playing. But I almost kind of wish that they had done every other day so that everybody had a full day of rest, a full day of preparing for their next game, stuff like that. Because I think that would go a long way towards what you're talking about with that idea of having some more time to mesh, to grow. They've only been there since I think it's Friday of last week, playing with each other and stuff. So yeah, I do like the guard. I don't like I think you said earlier, I'm not going to be totally shocked if a Monday afternoon they are the champions, but I'm with you. Watching the Palms last night, it was
fun.
like, yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah.
When people are playing fun, that's something going on. Like, you can't just go out with a bunch of strangers and right away have fun. If you guys are having fun, you're like past the chemistry stage. And you're like, yeah, this is fun. Like, let's ball.
And they felt the most complete. Again, there are other teams that are close, I think, but they felt the most complete. They have people at all of the positions doing all of the things, and so I think I'm going in with the Palms. The question is, do I go with you on Allie? You know what? I'm gonna.
I think it's her or Charlotte. I don't think there's, in the guys' game, you could pick someone on each roster. I look at the girls' rosters and I don't see two clear-cut top dogs. It's for sure.
I'm going one we talked about earlier. I'm gonna again today, Sydney Black. The issue with Sydney Black is the issue with her is they seem like they just don't have a chance to even make the playoffs. Like they seem clearly that fourth place team, and they will not make the playoffs.
And I think with her being the one and the only one on that roster, I think that defenses are going to start saying, I don't care if the other four beat us. We're not going to let her beat us. Where now all of a sudden it's like a lot of emphasis on her. And, she got a lot. In the first game, she started off hot. They went away from her for a little bit, then they came back to her. This game, they stayed with her all game. But again, like when you're the one all day, all the time, that's grueling. Like, it's physically grueling. Now all of a sudden your first step isn't as quick because you're a little beat up and you're taking hits. And so I'm with you. She's definitely the third one. She's the next one.
She's one I am saying until tomorrow's games, and we have a little bit more of a clearer picture, because I think she's capable, even though I think it's unlikely that her team is even around long enough for her to be in that conversation from the end of the tournament. So with that being said, we will get out of here. But just before we get out, I wanted to say I got a comment on one of the videos. I don't even remember which one, from a guy named, I hope I'm not saying this incorrectly, Derek Pham, I think was his name, who thanked us for this content and was very appreciative. And I just wanted to shout him out real quick and say that meant a lot. Again, I have been working on this for about 2 months, and you put it out and it's like, is anyone gonna listen to this at all? So I am, so it was definitely nice to hear and see. So with that being said, I will get out of here. Thank you, Kacy, for joining us. I really appreciated all of the specifically women's conversation that we could have and learn from, but all of it obviously was great. I hope maybe you have some time before we're all said and done that you can come back.
Saturday. Yeah, definitely want to. This is fun. Okay.
And then tomorrow night, for those listening, I did accidentally schedule a date for Valentine's Day. So I'm hoping to get up early Saturday morning and still get an episode out. But if you don't hear from me on Saturday, that's what happened. We will continue Saturday night, and we'll put something out for Sunday for sure, and the rest of the tournament as well. So hopefully there's something for you guys Saturday morning. If not, apologies, but we'll see you Sunday morning.